The final war is about to happen. Each faction is preparing for fictional fight battling, pirates are pirating, revolutionaries are revolting, and warlords are out, well, you know, what actually are they doing? They themselves are not sure because they're in a bit of an awkward position. After having been cut off from the bountiful teat of the world government, the warlords now need to source their sustenance elsewhere. Hence the formation of Cross Guild, a haven for the politically homeless, rejected by the Marines, not on board with the cause enough to become revolutionaries, and are too lacking in their own right to make it on their own as pirates in the New World. Now, I should also say that One Piece is a series where the world government are the cause of almost every single problem, especially their own. And so the creation of Cross Guild is very much a reckoning of world government decision-making. After deciding to dissolve the warlords, Cross Guild is now an alliance of 3 of those former warlords, 2 of which were unceremoniously cut loose and immediately attacked, very rude. And a lot of people have had some very wild ideas of who's going to join Cross Guild in the future, but if there are more members, I believe that there'll be former warlords, and that what we could end up with is an entire pirate crew made up of 7 warlords of the sea, which would end up constructing the single most powerful pirate crew since the Rocks Pirates. And the crazy thing is that almost each and every former warlord has a reason to join Cross Guild. The only exceptions to this being Blackbeard and Jinbei, however, they are quite unique because they were also the only 2 members to resign from the 7 warlords, whereas every other member had their title revoked. So thematically, Blackbeard and Jinbei have always been separated from their peers, but everyone else has at least one thing in common, which is a deep grudge against the world government for stripping them, metaphorically with their titles and such, and in at least 4 cases, quite literally. But the first and most flamboyant of candidates to discuss is the ever-cackling Doflamingo, a man who is not done in this story. Oda generally does one of 2 things with former villains. He either discards them and forgets about them like Kuro, or he has them go off and conduct their own adventures that we keep track of. And Doflamingo falls into the second category. Every time there's a major global event, one of Oda's mandatory stops is an impel down to see Doflamingo having a bit of a lull at a very serious newspaper. And he's also a character who often provides surprisingly integral information, such as informing Magellan that most cities on this planet would be wiped out with a sea level rise of 5 meters, and that perhaps they should be moving to higher ground right now, lest all of Impel Down be completely submerged. And there is some potential foreshadowing for him joining Cross Guild. During Marineford, Doflamingo did suggest that both he and Crocodile team up, to which Crocodile said, yeah, nah, and then it didn't happen. But maybe this time around the answer will be, nah, yeah. And a second Impel Down jailbreak will almost certainly happen. 1, because Bon Clay is the current queen of level 5.5, with Emporio Ivankov originally having been planted there by the Revolutionary Army for some sort of grand plot, and that grand plot still exists. But even then, there's going to need to be a prison break real soon out of sheer necessity. Most of Impel Down is already underwater, but the entrance is above water, but not a lot of it, and it'll be completely submerged in no time if Imu keeps insisting that an increasingly large list of things never existed. And if I were to put myself in the surprisingly mundane shoes of the world nobles. I don't wear very fancy shoes, but if I was inside them, then my bet would be that the solution to this problem of the sea levels rising would be to just abandon Impel Down. Both the prisoners and the guards, because to a world noble, what's the difference? So we could see a situation where there could be a combined breakout of prisoners and guards rebelling against the world government together, which is very bad news for Magellan's agoraphobia, as he would be forced to go outside. But once he's out, where's Doflamingo gonna go? He's been rejected by the world nobles, he's lost his pirate empire, the one emperor of the sea that he was cuddling up to got monkey punched into magma, so where else could one go to make use of his warlord credentials than Cross Guild? And I'd say very much the same for Gecko Moria, who feels like the most obvious candidate for me. He's had a very rough time since the events of Thriller Bark, where all of his sedentary hopes and dreams were shattered once more, and despite his plan to create a new crew of zombies to make sure that he never has to feel the pain of losing his crew again, he went and lost his crew again, and is feeling many pains because Absalom was killed by the Blackbeard pirates. However, even though we didn't see him, Moria did end up escaping Hachinosu during the sword raid. And realistically, what else is this big boy gonna do? He probably wants revenge against Blackbeard, he despises Luffy, the world government have rejected him, and Shanks doesn't have enough room on the Red Force for Moria's enormous behind. But do you know where we do have space? That's right. Buggy's flagship at the big top, it's even got big in the name. But the main reason reason why I think that Moria is more or less a lock for Cross Guild is because of Perona. Because if Perona needs to run to safety, then the obvious person to go to is Mihawk, because he tolerates her for very easy to see reasons. But if Moria was to rock up, and I imagine that the rest of Cross Guild would probably embrace him with open arms. Because Mihawk aside, Cross Guild seems to function as a bit of a support group for characters who have been beaten by Luffy, and Moria's not weak. He gets clowned on a lot, by me, admittedly, but he's an insanely useful dude to have around. With the mind of Crocodile and the flashiness of Buggy, I think that Moria could be put to quite devastating use, and if anyone deserves a very violent redemption, I do think it's Moria. After the Paramount War, the world government tried to have him assassinated, so I would love to see him rock up to the final war and punch each of the 5 elders in the dick, both metaphorically and literally. And if both Moria and Doflamingo were to join, then I think that would be a fun interaction as well, because the world government sent Doflamingo to assassinate Moria. Awkward. And as a side note, Doflamingo is currently expecting to be assassinated in prison because he knows too much about assorted world noble's secrets, so he and Moria do probably have quite a bit to bond over in that regard. And this trauma bonding is very important because that is the core aspect that links every former warlord of the sea. With the one that I'm personally most interested in right now being Boa Hancock, because it's very hard to predict what her actions are going to be. Hancock is in a very unique situation because she still has a kingdom to protect, and every other warlord that did have territory of their own to hold have since lost it, and so they're able to act as free bowling agents. But with Amazon Lily, that was recently invaded by both Blackbeard and the Marines at the same time, a chaotic sandwich that was thrown in the bin by Silver's Rayleigh. But even the former first mate of the Pirate King admitted that he would be unlikely to win against Blackbeard if it came down to a full-on fight. I would argue that the most reasonable thing for Boa Hancock to do would be to leave Amazon Lily, because neither Blackbeard nor the Marines were there for the island or its people or its snakes or its mushrooms. The Marines were there for a singular person, and Blackbeard was there for some of that sweet, sweet magical fruit. Blackbeard led an invasion purely to take Hancock's Miramara no Mi, so if she were to leave the island, then no faction would have any reason to target Amazon Lily. However, not being on the island leaves her quite vulnerable, and look, I could see Boa Hancock joining Cross Guild for very much the same sort of reason that Mihawk did. The idea of, look, I don't want to be here, but at least I'm going to be left alone in relative peace while I am. I think it may also be the funniest possible outcome, which you should always take into consideration with Oda. I mean, the fact that Buggy is an Emperor of the Sea right now is only because it was the funniest possible thing to do. And Boa Hancock joining Cross Guild would create a lot of comic tension, because she is, of course, an overt Luffy supporter, but also a self-professed Luffy lover, meaning that she may even try to actively undermine Buggy's ambitions to become the Pirate King. But I'm going to ask Hancock the same question as the rest of the warlords. If not Cross Guild, then where? She can't just stay with Rayleigh because he's essentially said that he's not strong enough to protect her. And I don't know if she'd flee to Luffy because I can't see Hancock becoming a temporary crew member, nor do I really see her joining the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, mostly because all of those pirates are scattered throughout the New World at the moment. And the more I think about it, the more that Cross Guild does seem like one of the more reasonable options. Because Boa Hancock does have something in common with the founding members, which is that she has been thoroughly screwed over by the world government. Something that every warlord can bond over, and there could be a collective desire among them to channel that fury right back at the world government. However, there is one original former warlord who the word fury rarely applies to, and in fact these days the entire concept of emotions in general are a bit up in the air, but because he's still with us, we should also talk about Bartholomew Kuma. He's probably the hardest former warlord to make an argument for at the moment. One, because we don't even know if he's still alive. We have his body with us, nay, his corpse, nay, his machine parts, and there are times when Oda has artfully drawn them as if he's making a slight smile. But the best case I could make for Kuma joining Cross Guild is purely thematic, mainly in that it would be amazing to see all of the original former warlords of the sea minus Shinbei together again, and perhaps in the final war, what we can do right is we can recreate that iconic Marineford panel of the warlords lined up ready to fight, except this time they're gearing up to fight against the world government. And I guess the way to get Kuma there would be to say that it's too dangerous for both he and Bonnie to continue with the Straw Hats post-Elbaf. But if that were the case, then surely the most logical next point of call would be the Revolutionary Army, who have that strong emotional connection to Kuma and who would protect his daughter with their lives, as opposed to an assortment of flippant clown pieces who would probably sell Bonnie for a chest full of shiny things. I want it to happen. I would love Kuma to face off against the world government alongside his former colleagues, but I don't know if there's a clean way to do it. Which covers the original 7 warlords. However, there have been many 7 warlords, far more than just 7, both before and after the first 7 we knew, and one currently displaced new warlord warlord is Edward Weevil. He's another Mihawk-like faction. Weevil doesn't really have a crew, he's a one-man tank, and he has a small loud woman next to him at all times. But that small loud woman could very well be the key here, because at the time of recording this video, Edward Weevil has currently been defeated by Admiral Ryokugyu and is in the delicious-sounding custody of the world government. So in order to get him back, the original, much smaller and prunier Buckingham Stussy has been looking for some friends to help her, which is why she's currently pleading with Marco on Sphinx Island. She also mentioned asking Dr. Vegapunk about Weevil's origins, implying that he's a clone of Whitebeard, but that's a bit of a difficult task to accomplish now, since most of Vegapunk is dead, and in her desperation, Miss Buckingham Stussy may turn to the one faction who has declared open hostilities against the world government with their bounty system, and promise them that both she and Weevil will join Cross Guild after a successful prison break. Now, speaking of prison, I made a comment about stripping earlier, and that's because the world government have quite literally stripped a surprising proportion of the warlords, with Crocodile, Jinbei, Doflamingo, and Weevil having now been imprisoned, which involves what I like to call the strip and dip, when new prisoners are baptized in Hell's hot tub, and Boa Hancock was stripped to be branded with the hoof of the world nobles. So a lot of them do have that very unfortunate experience in common. But back to Weevil, he's not the kind of strength that Cross Guild can just ignore. And in fact, its 3 founding members have a profound respect for Whitebeard. Just seeing Whitebeard's tattoo on Ace's back was enough to make Buggy soil his circus tent. Mihawk mentioned the distance between the two of them during the Paramount War, and Crocodile of course got his facial scar from Whitebeard back in the day. So I do think that both Buggy and Crocodile at least would not refuse that power. And the great thing about Weevil is that, look, let's be real, he's not the crunchiest biscuit in the packet. His mind is a lot softer and a bit more undercooked, meaning that he should be easy enough to issue orders to and not have to worry about him plotting against you. However, just like Kuma, there is another natural option to be considered, which is of course the formation of Neomounts. Miss Buckingham Stussy could go back to her former colleagues Judge and Caesar and plot Weevil's freedom with them, assuming that they in any way care, which is it's a big assumption. But I would be remiss not to mention the man whose name is in the word warlord, provided you spell it incorrectly, being Mr. Trafalgar Law. So Law, he's in a weird spot right now. He's effectively out of the race to become the next pirate king, and he's no doubt gonna need to align himself with someone. And my argument for Law is quite similar to the argument with Kuma, mostly that because Law was a warlord once, it would be nice to see as many of them as we can gather together in a single crew. But I do also think that Law is quite a special case and may not need to join the support group. And whether he does or not, I will say it's my personal dream to see a brief fight between Law and Buggy, because I just want to see that moment where Law realizes that his room-cutting powers are completely countered by Buggy. But if he did join, mate, that would be a pretty big win for Cross Guild. Probably the most prestigious possible player draft to date, as acquiring Law would be acquiring another 3 billion berry bounty to add to the pile of what Buggy and Mihawk bring to the table. But I do think that Law's more natural alliance would be with Eustace Kid and potentially the other members of the worst generation, because the Law is a socially awkward butterfly that can be swapped between various groups in one piece, including the warlords. But the worst generation, that still very much feels like his home. And look, if Doflamingo were to join Cross Guild, then I don't think it's a compatible home for Law in any way. It's very hard to imagine those two putting their grudges against one another aside for the sake of crowning a clown. But there is another warlord that we haven't discussed yet, and this is actually one who we haven't even met yet. His name is Hanafuda, and he was defeated by Ace before Luffy set out to sea. His epithet is the King of Lizards, and he's theorized to have been a plant working on behalf of Kaido and the Beast Pirates, primarily because his name fits their card game scheme, and his goal was to collect ancient Zoan fruits. And Oda went to the effort to draw this guy in the SBS of Volume 109, which is much more than I ever thought we'd get of him. And I'm not saying that he'll join Cross Guild and be a big deal. No one's gonna go, oh mate, it's Hanafuda. But here's my vision, right? It's the final war. Things are very dramatic. Explosions, fire. We're about to lose everything, and then bam! Buggy the Clown arrives at the battlefield with a crew of almost every former warlord, and deep into the background is a scribbled drawing of Hanafuda. We don't make a big deal out of him, and if you don't know who you're looking for, you don't even notice him. But it would just be a nice nod to the idea of the warlords to have him there in the tiniest of capacities. And while we're here, I've also got to bring up my man Simon, the primary antagonist of One Piece, great hidden treasure of the 7 Phantom Islands for the Game Boy Advance, because he was mentioned as being on the waiting list for the 7 warlords, but never got the call to take up the position, likely because of what a disappointment he was, is, and will continue to be. But in my dream scenario where we get that glorious 2-page spread of Cross Guild during the final war, right behind the small cameo of Hanafuda, if I could ask for one more thing, and maybe just sneak a tiny Simon scribble in there as well. Yeah, it'll be fun.